I've talked to other people that have been in war zones or that have been in these horrible places where children are suffering or whatever. And it's like, if you feel the way you want to feel about each of those individual children or people, you'll just combust. Like you'll just explode. It's not possible for you to take it all. But take me through that, because you weren't experiencing this as an adult. You were experiencing this as a child, looking upon these people that are in just this pathetic state. And not only could you not do anything, but you couldn't even feel enough empathy to help them or to give them a kind word. I just can't really fathom it, to be honest.
Yeah, I still remember seeing this one young man, or I don't know, even teenage boy or like early 20s young man. When you're so malnourished, every hole in your body just opens up. And behind him, his organs were just falling out of him. And they're like flies, and there's dogs waiting for him to die off. And while his organs all came out of him, he was still begging for food. And I was looking down at him, you're numb at that point, you know. And I think in some sense, that's how our brain protects us to help us to survive the situation. And in North Korea, compassion is not a word that people use. There's no word for love. North Korean people die without ever someone say to them that somebody loves them. Like when I was in North Korea, my father never told him he loved me when he passed away. So even very basic thing that is compassion, love, is being denied because Kim Jong-un was afraid that if people, he banned Mother's Day a few years ago, and the thought was if we love our mothers, we are not going to love them as much. So he even banned the love between mother and the child. So in North Korea, it's a different planet. Like even that very basic thing that as a human you can do, empathy, that is not allowed.
And you talk about the brainwashing and the control of thoughts, but now you're also talking about the control of language. Mm-hmm. And that, I was shocked to read that there is no word for love or empathy or compassion or something in the North Korean vernacular. And so what this all kind of led to, and again, we're skipping over a lot, so I think it's well worth everybody's time to buy your new book, While Time Remains, and also your memoir, because you get into a lot of detail where we're just skimming the surface. But when you were 13, you and your family decided that you would try to escape North Korea and go to China. And so human traffickers actually tricked you and your mother to follow them to China. And in your memoir, you describe finding out that your mother was actually raped by one of the traffickers. And you found out that your mom had actually done this to protect you because it was actually you that the trafficker wanted to rape. And then a little later, you actually describe seeing your mother raped by one of the traffickers and how that was, in the most macabre way, that was actually your introduction to the act of sex. And I've heard you tell this story many times, and it's not lost on me that this is a terrible thing to talk about. But can you describe the decision-making process to try and escape North Korea, and then also the subsequent issues that you ran into once you got into China?
Yeah, so as you said, North Koreans, we don't even know there's much outside the world exists. Luckily, I was living on the border town of North Korea. So I was able to see these lights at night coming from Chinese side. And that's when we thought, if we go where the lights were, we could find something to eat. And my sister escaped first when she was 16 years old. And then 1 week later, my mother and I followed her. We found a lady who wanted to help us to cross the river into China. And when you are so desperate, you don't even question. If I didn't cross that night, I would died from starvation long ago.
Right.
So we did follow her, and then she matched us with a broker. And like what you said, the first thing I was seeing in China was my mother being raped. And then they were selling us as sex slaves. So there was a one-child policy in China that recently got ended. Due to that policy, a lot of people were aborting girls and kept the boys. So now there are more than 33 million men cannot find wives in China. So they buy North Korean girls as their sex toys. And also for organ harvesting, they need to buy these girls and men and take their organs out and just discard their body because we are not protected by any law, right? Even killing us like a killing of mice, not even less valuable than dog and pig. Nobody going to hold them accountable. And that was my fate when I got to China. It was in some sense it's worse than what North Korea was.
And so you mentioned how you and your mother were sold, and you were actually sold separately as
Yeah.
part of these human trafficking transactions. But one thing I felt that was interesting as you described the story on me is that you described what it was like hearing men barter and negotiate for you and your mother as if you were, an animal of some kind. Take us through that, because as a young lady, as a 13-year-old, you're hearing these men compare you and your mother and almost pit you against one another, and where can they place you? Take us through that.
Yeah, I think I remember they would like make me stand up and like make me turn around and check my teeth and check our like bones and everything and see if we have any defects, right? If we are like disabled or not. And then they started negotiating, and my mom was just in her 40s, just turned 40 or something. So they were like, is she able to reproduce or not? Because if the women can reproduce, then they would sell the babies as like porn like industry, as a sex slave. So a lot of North Korean women also being bought, and they buy them and then get impregnate them, and then they keep making them to get pregnant and sell those child. And these are the more than 1 million of these children in China right now, who were born by North Korean women. So they were negotiating that I was 13 years old and I was a virgin. And this perverted men, they love child virginity. So they were, ranking my price to over $20, and they were making my mother were sold for $65.
And again, it's just astonishing to hear that in this country where, in this country, we have people that wait to have their families, and then maybe they struggle to get pregnant, and then they have to go through all these different processes to get pregnant. And it's usually a joyous thing. And then over there, it's like, again, you're just a commodity, just like, an animal giving birth to another animal that you can sell. And so, again, it just kind of gives you an idea of the level of depravity that you were dealing with in that area. And Yeonmi, things got so bad for you and your mother in China that you decided that you were going to try to escape to Mongolia, but not to relocate and stay in Mongolia, but with the eventual goal of making it to South Korea. And so you were helped along in this goal of escaping by a group of Christian missionaries. And we'll talk more about the Christian missionaries here in a second. But take us through that process of getting from China to Mongolia to South Korea. Why did that have to be the way you had to go?
So in China, we don't have any paid passport or ID or any documents. And if we get caught by Chinese police, they would catch us and send us back to North Korea to get killed and tortured or sent to prison camps. So we are extremely vulnerable. The only way for us to escape from China was actually walking across the frozen Gobi Desert into Mongolia. And somehow, if we didn't die in the desert and made it to Mongolia, then Mongolia might help us to go to South Korea as refugees.
So, Yeonmi, so you mentioned going across the Gobi Desert. When most of us hear desert, we think 100 degrees, sand everywhere. But talk about crossing the Gobi Desert at the time that you were crossing it, because my understanding is the time of year that you were crossing the Gobi Desert, temperatures would get to minus 30, minus 40. And it wasn't like you were in the world's best gear to make that trip. So let's talk a little bit more about what it was like actually crossing the desert.
Yeah, so this was almost end of February 2009 when I was 15 years old. We had one toddler in our group, and we had a total 8 people, including that child. And then they told us, gave us one compass, and then told us to, why don't you go follow the north and west direction and cross the 8 wire fences. And that might be Mongolia. And if you get caught by the Mongolian soldiers, tell them that we are refugee. But going through these wire fences and desert is like there are border guards with machine guns. If they see anybody cross, it's not like an American border, you can just walk in. They literally just shoot you. It's a shoot to kill order. Like they just shoot you and you die, and you just cross the border illegally, and nobody can question their authority to do that. And the wire fences are electrified. So if you touch it, you can just electrify and die. So that's why we needed a miracle. And we chose the coldest month And so the guards would think like nobody's crazy enough to go through this desert right now because minus 40 degrees, you breathe, it becomes all icicle. Like it's, if you don't move for 5 seconds, you can die from freezing to death. And we don't have gears like gloves or hat or scarf. We were just wearing thin jacket, no gloves, no boots. Just started walking from Gobi Desert, and somehow against all odds, I survived.
So, Yeonmi, I just recently read a book about a World War II pilot that, was shot down over Germany, and then he was in a German POW camp. His name is Frank Murphy, and there was a death march that they were on. And I remember hearing these stories about these other soldiers that on this march in the snow, very, very cold, similar situation, that these men would just walk out of line and walk into the snow, and they would just sit down. And it's just like, look, I can't. Like, I can't go anymore. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And these are strong, young military aged men, but they got to a point where they broke mentally.
Yeah.
I want you to talk a little bit more because, again, guys, we need to set the scene. She was not in snow boots. Yeonmi was not wearing a parka that you could, wear and, go up and climb a mountain during the wintertime. Thin jacket, thin clothes, not the world's best shoes. Again, minus 40-degree temperatures. Was there a time during that, Yeonmi, where you're like, okay, this is terrible. Like, I'd rather be back in North Korea. Or was it like, look, I'm either going to make it or I'm going to die trying? Just take me through that mindset, because to be honest, I don't have anything that even comes close to that in my life. And I'm assuming most of the guys listening to this don't either.
Yeah, it's like what shocked me standing on that Gobi Desert was it's like standing in front of the middle of the ocean. There is nothing indicates you that you're going forward or going circle or backwards. It's just pure sand and flat. So I was thinking like, are we going back or are we going forward? Are we going sideways? And then it was pitch dark. Eventually we got to see some stars, but there's times, throughout the night, based on the cloud, everything, you see some stars and it become pitch dark. And another danger that we had to avoid in the desert was not the soldiers, of course, but then the animals. They're very wild animals and snakes that come and eat people because they are very hungry too. And then I remember the missionaries were told us that if you cross 8 wire fences, it's gonna become Mongolia. So we'll keep looking for wire fences, but then you hallucinate, because you want it so much. You feel like there's a wire fence and you run and go, it's not there. And it literally, you might just lose your mind at that point. And I think that's when you don't even have strength to pray. All we said it was, Jesus' blood is my blood. Jesus' blood is my blood. And I think that's the only thing we said. And just keep thinking that line, what that means, and just keep going, and somehow miracle, saved us.